be likely the first of many discussions that we may have about campus climate within CLA and the data that we've received from the university's campus climate survey that they did last year. I'm a person who likes to try to solve problems, but I know that the issues that are embedded and revealed in the survey data don't lend themselves to easy solutions. But that said, I want to make sure that the data doesn't just sit on a shelf or in an inbox without our office or CLA more broadly making some intentional efforts to try to mitigate some of the issues that are highlighted in the data. I also don't want to assume that our small office, which right now consists of me and Stephanie and some graduate assistants, essentially, and Maria, who we share with ORGP, I don't want to assume that we have all the answers in ODEI. So I wanted to gather those who are closer to the students in today's discussion, but next week we'll also be talking about data related to faculty and staff. So wanted to bring people together who are closer to those who filled out the survey and who may have some helpful insights to help us better understand the data and identify potential strategies to address issues of concern. This discussion intentionally invited chairs and DEI committee leads, committee members, as well as others that may have a role in helping to address campus climate. I wanted to start there because the university's Office for Equity and Diversity has had some concerns about how broadly we share the report that was given to administration in the college. And so we've been given permission to share that full report with chairs, for example, but they don't want us to share the report broadly, but we can share summary information, which is what we will talk about today. And then the chairs still will get a copy of the fuller report. Unfortunately, the data we do have right now is at the college level. We don't have unit level data. Unfortunately, we also, at least not yet. There's data in the report about BIPOC students with regard to today's survey or today's meeting. The one next week, we'll talk about faculty and staff. We don't have that BIPOC data disaggregated, but it is something that I have requested, and they're mulling it over that, but given the size of CLA, we could have that data and not worry about identifying anybody. That's not true for some of the smaller colleges at the university. This is the first time that the university has done this campus climate survey, so there are some growing pains. I know their ultimate goal is to be as robust as what's the case with the engagement survey, and so we're just not there yet. So Jan, if you can show the slide deck, I wanted to just show an outline of how we're going to spend our time together. I'll wait for Jan to do that if he can share his screen. Oh, there we go. So if you didn't know, we're in the introductory remarks right now. We'll have a review of the campus climate data, and Jan, who's our graduate assistant, will lead us through that. My colleague Stephanie, who's the associate director in our office, will provide a high-level overview of some of the resources and initiatives within our office, as well as the university, that relate to enhancing campus climate that may be beneficial to some of your units. And then a bulk of our time will be spent discussing a number of questions and then talking about some possible next steps. And on the next slide, just want to draw your attention to the questions we plan to talk about after we go through the data. What do you see with regard to strengths and opportunities for improvement in the data? What questions do you have about the data, or what additional information would you like to know? To what extent does the data reflect what you see or experience or perceive in your unit? What's happening in your unit to address or mitigate climate issues? And then particularly for me, I think what's very important, what would you like to see from their Office of DEI and or the college more broadly to support efforts to enhance climate within your unit and within CLA? So those are the questions that we'll try to unpack and discuss when we after we've had a chance to review the data. So with that, I will turn it over to Jan to walk us through the data, and then I will place, I should be able to, in the chat, a copy of the slide deck so people can have that to access as well. So Jan.
Hello. So I'll take you through at least some of the data that we have highlighted that are sort of indicative of larger trends within the overall survey process. So first, let me address a question that's most likely going to come up for at least some of you, if not all of you, is this question of representativeness of the survey. And on the first things, you see that our response rates are somewhat low for the undergraduate students. It's fairly nice for graduate students, 1 in 4. But overall, we actually have usually higher percentages from our BIPOC students, or at least some of our BIPOC students. And I'm listing some of the specific categories here for you. In both cases, we have more responses from our female students, women, rather compared to their proportional within the student body, always within that respect. And for undergraduates, we have a pretty similar percentage of white students as in the student body. The graduate students show a lot higher percentages for many groups, but I think this might be the fact that we do not have a distinct category for international students who do make up over a third of our graduate student body. So this is likely sort of where some of that difference is coming in. I have sort of a few highlights for you to kind of think about as we go through it. About 50% of our students are satisfied with campus climate. Roughly 30% of our students say that they are satisfied with the commitment to DEI, but over 60% agree that the college has a strong commitment to DEI. So there's an interesting diversity here. Overall, our non-binary or transgender students state that they have all worse campus climate experiences. For men and women, so if we go by gender, oftentimes, though not always, there are similar responses. And so that's something we can kind of keep track of when it diverges or how much it is sort of similar. Overall, 10 to 20% of our students have experienced some level of discrimination over the past 12 months. It is a lot higher for our non-binary and BIPOC students. These are the sort of highest 2 percentages, and we'll see some of the specific examples. About 50% of our students feel valued in the college, and our non-binary transgender students state that less often that they feel valued, belong, or respected within the college or department, as we will see towards the end of this slide deck. So this is the sort of overall satisfaction with campus climates. There's be 2 slides here. One is for this is for undergraduate students, and the following one is for graduate students. Here you can see that sort of 50 to 60% of students of other undergrads are satisfied or very satisfied, and then the sort of neither nor or undissatisfied in about 14-15%. And then for graduate students, it's about the same, with the exception for our non-binary trans students who are markedly less satisfied with the campus climate, already sort of suggesting one of these trajectories that we will see. And then this is the satisfaction with the commitment to DEI. It's about a 30% that was already remarked on. One can note for our non-binary graduate students, we do not really have a response for satisfied on that side. So again, we'll already have sort of and paralleling our undergraduate students as well. This is one question that has a lot of sub-categories about sort of, do you agree with statements about campus? And you oftentimes, they're sort of negative statements in this, and as you can see here, they are highlighted in the blue titling. So I have to work harder than others to be valued equally at UMN. If they answer affirmatively, then that's presumably that's not a good thing, right? We want people to have worked the same way. And about 20% usually, with significant differences for our graduate students for non-binary trans students and our graduate BIPOC students, which both of them are over 50%. Who agree that they do have to work harder than others to be valued equally. I feel others don't value my opinions. There's yours particularly higher for graduate non-binary students. Otherwise, we're sort of in the teens for undergraduate students, but about 1 in 5 graduate students agree with that particular statement. Now, the experience with discrimination over the past month, or over the past year, and this is from a year when students were taking this, so this is now sort of year and a half, I think, to 2 years that since students took the survey. This is a kind of mirror image of each other. So, who did not feel discrimination and who did? But overall, again, our non-binary students, both undergraduate and graduate, and our BIPOC students on both categories are showing considerably different categories. But here, for instance, you can see that our differences for male and female, or for men and women, are not that high, perhaps with the exception of graduate students feeling discrimination based on gender. There's a 6% divergence there. Now, what kind of disability experiences or discrimination they had? So this one is based on disability and ability and mental health, kind of juxtaposing those two, with a very notably category that's sort of exceeding all the others. So, already kind of seeing the pattern here developing. It is notable that for mental health status, about 1/5 of our students in general this is something that they say they've experienced discrimination overall, and about 1 in 2 are non-binary students. If we pose this by racial or ethnic identity or sex, for racial and ethnic identity, it is notable that our BIPOC students, not surprisingly, do face a higher experience of this discrimination. Unfortunately, it is notable that for white graduate students here, that there is no bar for any experience of that. Based on sex, there's notably no difference here for graduate students, but some difference among undergraduate students. But interestingly, here men are indicating that they're experiencing discrimination, which leads to some further questioning there. So for national origin, so partially thinking here about our international students and our social class. Here we are missing the non-binary category. It's not always do we get all the responses, but for national origin, our BIPOC students are indicating quite high rates for both undergraduate and graduate, and for social class particularly this for non-binary students. Now, if we think about inside of the classroom and outside of the classroom, so inside of the classroom, our students agree that they are listened to by faculty instructors, well, quite consistently, fairly well, with 2 exceptions, or 3 exceptions. For white graduate students, BIPOC graduate students are both lower, and non-binary graduate students are as well lower. For this, when the feature is the student instructors, undergraduates generally, so they'll have a similar numbers for both their sort of fast student and faculty instructors, but considerably lower rates here for graduate students, although I do wonder what sort of qualifying as a graduate instructor for graduate students. Or other students are generally viewed well for graduate students, but a little bit less so for our undergrads. And also notably for staff members, reasonably good for graduate students, though not so much for our undergrads. Although this, and then there's also a similar question for our administrators, and those are considerably low, but it's also raising the questions to what extent our students interact with our sort of faculty, or our college administrators, or even our staff, and how often that sort of comes into play. but nonetheless, sort of notable bit. Now, out of the classroom, 1 in 2 students generally feels like that they are valued by other faculty members, with slightly higher rates for graduate students. Now, other students, graduate students, have a pretty good numbers overall, lower for our BIPOC and male students, and for our undergrads, it's a little bit lower, once again, but sort of in the 60s to 70s ranges in this particular case. Now, when it comes to belonging, when asked about I am valued in the college or department, about 50 to 60%, with the notable exception of graduate non-binary transgender students, who are considerably lower than everybody else. And if I feel I belong in my college or department, there's a pretty similar juxtaposition here, though there's an sort of fairly low rates from graduate students in general, I would say, but also among some of the undergraduate categories, as we can see. And 60 to 70% is perhaps not ideal, though certainly better than some of the other ones that we've seen. Now, this is the sort of other side of that commitment to DEI. 3/4 or 60 to 70 something percent generally state that college has a strong commitment to DEI, with once again, notable exception for our graduate non-binary students. And it's a similar image when it comes to I'm being treated with respect in my college or department, where we see some really fairly good numbers for our undergraduate students, graduate students generally being in the 70% rates, with the same exception as in the previous case.
Thanks, Jan, for sharing all that. It's just a lot to take in. So hopefully y'all are seeing some of these numbers and the way that, CLA is showing up for our students in our, in both the graduate and undergraduate spaces. So, as Amelius had mentioned earlier, what we can do about this, what our office has been trying to commit to try to improve these things. Some of these things on this list you'll be very familiar with. Some of them may be newer to you. Hopefully the first one you're familiar with, which is the CLA call-in. This is coming to your inboxes every Monday during the semester at 10 a.m. We talk about various different topics. A lot of them also intersect with the student experience. Some of them are related to faculty experience, but all of them do touch on how this relates to higher education and the CLA community. So that's one of our initiatives and some of the resources that we have. There is a link in the slide deck for our issues. Then after the call-in on this list, we have the Courageous Conversations About Race. We do host a series of book studies with various departments or units. And so if you're interested in doing any of these, you can also reach out to Amelius. Like if you and your unit would like to start a Courageous Conversation About Race book study, you would reach out to Amelius. You might be familiar with Courageous Conversations About Race, either from our call-in or our biannual meetings that we've had with the Office for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, where we often do exercises, implementation exercises from the books. And so there's an opportunity for your unit to go through the book study or the book and do your own study as a unit to kind of get through this process around courageous conversations, which really are necessary when you're talking about topics such as identity and specifically about race. So it's a great opportunity. So the CLA Climate Workforce created this guide. And so the guide that's on the third bullet point is a guide that you can use in terms of referencing. Again, Amelius has worked with this group for close to 2 years. And this was developed by this group. So just creating and welcoming inclusive workplaces for staff. So if you can't make it to Inclusive View, or you haven't done a book study, this is a really great guide for all in trying to build inclusive workplaces for people on campus. Next, we have the Equity Lens Policy Review Committee, which is definitely a mouthful, but we are a great group of folks from across the college that are reviewing different policies that are put in place to determine the level of equity that's in them, or if there are areas that could be more equitable. This group reviews them with a lot of care, a lot of consideration. I sit in on these meetings and there's a lot of thought and input from a range of voices, which is really great to have in our college, so that we see that our policies are actually supporting equity and inclusion. So that is the Equity Lens Policy Review Committee. Just recently, last Thursday, we hosted the first session of the Inclusive U workshops. This is staff geared. This is specific to staff. This will hopefully open it and broaden it later. But at this point, we know that we focus a lot on pedagogy and faculty, but this is a space for staff to work on inclusive practices. And so we held our first pilot session last Thursday. So if you were able to attend that or you're part of that, we're so glad to have you. If you couldn't make this cohort, we hope to offer additional cohorts in the near future in multiple different modalities as well. We've gotten that feedback and we definitely hear you. The next thing on here are the diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice pedagogy grants. We are working with the Center for Educational Innovation, or CEI, on providing grants to various departments. The cohort from 23, the academic year of 23 to 24 that we're currently in, there were 4 units that received funding for various projects they had to increase diversity, equity, inclusion. And again, if we're talking about the graduate student experience and the undergraduate student experience with this climate survey, these areas and these departments, we're trying to use their funds to improve their climate within their departments or units. So I'm really happy to say that we're working with CEI to open these back up again for the academic year of 24-25. So there'll be another round of pedagogy grants, and more information about that will be forthcoming, including roundtables that will be held later this month. We're working out some of the details of the dates, but if your group or unit is interested in the pedagogy grants, just be on the lookout for more communications from our office. The next thing on here we have is the graduate program climate transformation process. And shout out, I see you, Jen Marshall, in the crowd here. But this is something currently that art history is in the process of. It's something that our office has been working with them for just under a year, but culminating here as we wrap up the work where the department has gone through its own DEI process assessment, getting feedback from students, graduate students, faculty, and trying to really pay attention to the way that their department is being inclusive in their practices. And so we have that as an option as well. This is also being facilitated by our office in CLA, but also a joint effort with the graduate school. Again, we look at those graduate student numbers, some of them are pretty staggering. And so this is a really strong area for us to contribute to more inclusive spaces and environments within our, for our graduate students within our different departments. The last 2 things on here, we have individual unit consultations. So these are some things that you could reach out to Amelius in terms of getting consultations. It can be joined with Amelius and myself. I am currently a grad student here in CLA, and so I have some very firsthand experience with a lot of things going on, but also am firmly attached to this office and the work that we're doing to really help the college move along in our efforts and our mission around DEI. The last one on here also, again, if you're interested, this is the Intercultural Development Inventory, or the IDI as it's more commonly known. And this is another system where you can bring in units or do assessments on how people interact in an intercultural capacity. I believe Amelius is a certified, what is it called, Amelia? Administrator?
A qualified administrator.
Thank you. Thank you so much. A qualified administrator. So if you have interest with your group doing the IDI assessments and seeing how that might work within your unit, you can also reach out to Amelius regarding that assessment and that work within your units or departments. So those are the CLA specific resources. So great with that. And then I'll have you go to the next slide for me, please, Jan. Okay, great. So CLA has its own, and that was that previous slide. I want to say it was slide 24. Slide 25 are the ones that are more broadly open to the university and the system, not specific to CLA. So we have Accessible U. I would strongly recommend looking this up. We have a couple call-in issues about accessibility and disability on campus, which I also recommend that you look up. But Accessible U also is a great resource in terms of trying to extend your accessibility within your units and departments. As I previously mentioned, our office has worked with the Center for Educational Innovation, or CEI, and they are really centered on pedagogy and improving pedagogical practices. Oftentimes, the material is geared towards inclusive pedagogy or anti-racist pedagogy. So they have the Inclusive Teaching at a Predominantly White Institution series that we co-hosted with them over the last 3 semesters, not this spring semester, but we had them in the fall and then the previous 2 semesters. Then also Teaching with Access and Inclusion. So those resources are available on the slide if you are working with a unit that wants to bring a little bit more awareness and professional development in a pedagogical way. The Office for Equity and Diversity, or OED, offers ECHO training programs. So those are workshops that you can take. They have varied topics, so I think they span from like religion to race to different areas that you might want to look up and see. I know they have anti-bias for hiring and things like that as well. The fundamentals of disability accommodations and inclusive course design. So again, if you're working with units or you're working with your department, that is trying to design a course and you want it to be accessible, this might be a resource that you want to check into. Next is the Go for Equity project. And this is a student resource, but it's available to faculty and staff. And this is just kind of a module system that will walk you through some of the fundamentals of inclusion and diversity. And I think all first-year students are required to take this. And so it's also open for faculty and staff in terms of looking at the resources that are available. We have the graduate school climate transformation process that I mentioned also. Like I said, that was with the graduate school, so the university office for graduate students, and then the one that I mentioned that we are partnering with them and art history currently. Two more bullets and I get to kind of stop talking at y'all and we can do a little bit more engagement. But OED not only offers the ECHO trainings, but there are also different education program workshops that you can look into and use as a resource, again, to just bolster some of the inclusive practices within your departments and units. And then finally, on the slide that you can click on and view, there are just some other miscellaneous university DEI related resources that you can check into, or if you're interested in participating, you'll be able to follow that link and get a little bit more information.
Thank you, Stephanie. And just as a reminder, we can stop the recording. So here are the discussion prompts, but before